week's edition of the Nation's Capital Sports Show, where it's most definitely on. From my left to my right, we have Vincent Charles, Stephen Manguez, Afshin Banab, Chris Jerry. I'm Kevin Jeter. Gentlemen, let's get talking about what we enjoy talking about the best and the most, and that is sports here in the DMV. Our first rule of business is to talk about those Washington Capitals. For all intent and purposes, they have been shut out mathematically. They will not be going to the NHL playoffs. Do not pass go. What a day.
Yeah, they.
Yep.
4 years ago, Ted Leonsis came out and, after winning the President's Trophy for the best record in the National Hockey League, he said, watch out for this team. They're going to do something, maybe not next year, but the year after. And they've been in a slow decline ever since. So things are going to have to, changes will have to be made, Kevin. Heads will have to roll eventually.
Well, as that Ray Charles song would go, change will be coming. Yeah. Speaking of changes coming, let's talk about strategically. What difference, what could have the Capitals done to avoid this mess from a playing standpoint of view, Stephen?
Well, from the playing standpoint, it's purely defense. I mean, we know the troubles we've had, poor back checking, not just Alex Ovechkin, but many of the other players on the team. And Alex has had a lot made up about him on his back checking with his minus 36, but that's not necessarily what he's there to get paid for. And also, we know we're on a firing watch for GM now, probably Oates as well. And an interesting stat on that defense, this year with 2 or fewer goals when we scored that, we have a 0-25-6 record. And under 2 years under Oates, 1 win. So a 1-41-8 record when we scored 2 or fewer goals.
Wow.
So stronger defense with whoever comes in.
That's crazy. Chris, you've talked about this from the start of the season, that they would actually have to play above board. They entered the Metropolitan Division. This is what the NHL wanted in terms of competition. Had they been in any other division 2 years ago or a year ago, they probably would have made the playoffs. But this particular time around, they got what was coming to them. And when you don't perform, I guess you don't win and you don't advance.
Well, that's exactly right. If you think about it, had they not had the new divisional alignment, the Capitals would have finished second in a 5-team division. But because they got moved to this new Metropolitan Division and had to play much better teams, that cost them. That's probably the fool's gold that's existed the last few years, because they have much easier teams to play against, and so their point number was high, but when they got in the playoffs, they went out in the first round. So I think definitely this move to the Metropolitan Division did them no good, and they only had 28 regular time wins in regulation or overtime, and that was by far the lowest of any of the teams that were in contention for playoffs this year.
Thanks, Chris. We want to remind everyone that you're watching the Nation's Capital Sports Show on AIM or AIM, Comcast 69, and Fios 38. Vincent, we covered the Capitals in podcast 154, where you can listen to that on tunein.com. And one of the comments that you made in terms of changes that had to be made was perhaps Alex Ovechkin should be traded. You felt that we could get something for him. Do you still stand by that comment that you made a week and a half from the time in which we did that podcast?
I still do, Kevin. I think it's going to be a long summer for Ted Leonsis, because he really has a lot of thinking to do. He has to get with the upper management and decide what's going to happen with Ovechkin. And I do stand behind that. I think it's time for maybe Ovechkin to go, get something for him while he's still worth something, shore up that defense, get a few more players, and rebuild.
All right, going to get you guys in on that. Afshin, you always say, and you've said this in the 4 years that we've been doing this podcast and the 2.5 years that we've been doing the show here at AIM, is basically after a hockey season, cooler heads need to prevail. Ted Leonsis came out with a statement to the fans and apologized, basically says we didn't make the playoffs, changes will have to be made. In your opinion, what changes do you have to make in order for the Capitals to move forward?
Well, I'll tell you something, Kevin, and Vincent, I agree with you to a certain respect on the Alex Ovechkin case. I do not think he is the main problem of this team, though, even though he is a minus 35. Mike Green and Brooks Lake came off of 2 great seasons 3 or 4 years ago. They signed 2 huge contracts, and they have done nothing since. All they've done is gotten injured every single season. I think those 2 guys are just as important to this team as Ovechkin, and I think if you're going to trade anybody, you might want to get them to, you might want to move them as well, because you can get a lot for Ovechkin right now, But I don't know if I'd want to get rid of him just yet. He is in the prime of his career, and he's got a lot to offer, even though that, like Stephen mentioned, that minus 35, which is kind of pathetic. But still,
Yeah.
he's not there for defense most of the time. He's there to score. But I understand what you're saying, but I think Brooks Like and Mike Green have to take as much responsibility as anybody else on that team.
Chris, we want to get you to jump in, and then, of course, Stephen.
Well, I just say the thing about trading Ovechkin is the National Hockey League salary cap is really prohibitive. So, it's not an issue to just trading Ovechkin and getting better players. It's like, who are you going to move him to? What kind of players are you going to get back? And is that team going to be able to fit him in their salary cap? And that's going to be hard to do. I don't see Alex going anywhere.
And Stephen, I actually stated on the podcast that we did that perhaps trading for Alex Ovechkin would not be the good thing to do, because you're talking about from a strategic standpoint of view that Ovechkin is not part of the problem. He's one of the players that play in the slot, and if the Greens of the world would do their jobs, then basically that would make his job a lot easier. After all, Alex Ovechkin is known as an offensive type of player. He's not a defensive juggernaut. I think he needs some help. That's just my opinion.
Absolutely. I think Ovechkin should stay, but maybe reaching a compromise. Maybe it's time to strip the C off of his jersey and just move ahead with somebody else as a captain. Whether that captain's here now or is yet to arrive in D.C. is to be seen. But I'll compromise with you, Vincent, and we'll say let's remove the C first before we start talking about getting rid of him. I agree with that, Sheen. Mike Green is the problem. He's the next of the big three when you talk GM, Adam Oates, and then Mike Green are probably the first three to fall, I think. He's still a good player, but we need stronger defense. You look at our defense, we're playing with a lot of minor leaguers this year, coming up, in and out, on rotation. John Carlson's a two-way guy, still predominantly offense on his part, which leaves you with Carl Alsner as basically the only true defenseman on the team, and it's pretty hard to play with one defenseman.
All right, let's talk a little bit about GM. General Manager George McPhee. I kind of know your feelings, but I'm going to let you state the obvious. Should he stay or should he go?
Yeah, it's time. He's 16, 17 years. I really was disappointed when he let Semyon Varlamov leave a couple of years ago. That was, to me, one of the worst moves he's ever made. But yes, he should go in my mind.
Chris?
Yeah, I think it's probably about time just for change. And I think Ted knows that somebody has to be a sacrificial lamb for the fan base, because the fan base wants to do something. And I think McPhee is the easiest to let go.
Vincent?
I agree. I think he's had a good run, and I think it's time for a change.
Yeah, you've heard me say it already. It's time to move on, start the next chapter.
Wanted to ask you about Adam Oates. You think Adam Oates should be served up as well?
I do. Now, maybe that's more fault of all the other problems we had, the players that he's dealt with, but it just gets to a point where you can't let it go on a whole lot longer. If you're going to change the system, you might as well just change everything, let him go as well. And I think one telling thing that was interesting was he had his big speech, and we almost made that late run for the playoffs, winning 3 of the last 4. And I heard Alsner personally say, we had that speech a little too late, and we could have had it earlier. We could have been turned around quicker. So perhaps a motivational standpoint as well to get them turning, to make that push a month earlier than it happened.
All right, gentlemen, going to get you to grade the Washington Capitals from A to F. A being, of course, good, and B, you're the teacher here, and you're the teacher as well. But we all kind of know how this grading system works. First, we're going to start with you, Chris.
Well, they finished 9th and needed to get up into the top 8. So I'd give them a D. I wouldn't give them an F, but I'd give them a D.
Can I give him an E for effort?
Yeah.
I agree. He's probably a D.
Give him an F for I'm still a big fan. I really don't want to grade them badly, but it's gone south.
Well, you'll have next year to rock that red. All of us will. Vincent.
Absolutely.
I'd say C-. That might sound a little bit lenient, but there were some positive things about the team. The 50 goals by Ovechkin, over 50 goals, that was a good thing. There were bright moments.
That's right.
And they almost made it, so C-.
All right.
Tremendous special teams. I would say that brings the grade up. It was great special teams on the power play.
All right.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. Speaking of bringing the grade up, the Washington Wizards have brought their grade up, and they are going to the NBA playoffs.
Are you kidding me?
That's right. And so the question that I'm going to ask you guys, if this was a performance objective for Ernie Grunfeld, the general manager and the vice president of basketball operations, as well as the coach of the Wizards, Whitman, should they be extended for 1 year?
Oh, I think they will come back for another year, especially if they do play a team like Toronto and actually get by the first round against the likes of a Toronto Raptors squad. So they would probably come back for another year. How can you fire somebody when they make the playoffs after 4 years, Chris?
Well, let's go to Chris because I saw this huge smile coming across Chris's face, and I gotta hear what you gotta say.
No, God bless them. I'm glad they made the playoffs, And I'm a Wizards fan. That's one of the local teams I root for. But I'll tell you, one change I still would make whether they made the playoffs is Randy Whitman. I wouldn't bring him back. I'd make a coaching change.
And why would you do that?
I just think that they need another coach going forward. I mean, he did a good job with what they have, but for me, I think there's other coaches out there that can do a much better job with this team moving them forward. I think another coach can get them to another level.
All right.
Yeah, I think just like Chris is saying, you're starting to reach that tipping point where we've been on a good ascend. We're now a playoff team, and there's going to be a lot of thought into how far can what you have actually take you, and when is the right time to bring in new people, to get new players here, and to really cross over and start to become hopefully one of the Eastern Conference powerhouses.
Well, I think
a few years.
I think
In a
that's
few
a
years.
stretch because all roads to any advancement will probably lead through Miami.
Right.
And then, of course, you have the Indiana Pacers, in which they did beat during the course of the regular season.
Right, and my thought on that is, I mean, I'm talking years still here, not necessarily next year or maybe even the following, but maybe 3 years or so it's possible. The Heat are going to be an aging team soon, and perhaps the Pacers are proving to be a bridesmaid and never a bride. So we'll see.
Vincent.
I disagree with you guys. You have to remember, the Wizards had that key injury with Nene, and Whitman got them through it, and they responded. Whitman is responsible for the maturation of some of these younger guys, especially Wall and Bill.
So you agree that Whitman should be extended 1 year
I
contract?
do. I
Okay.
certainly do.
All right. So let's talk a little bit in terms of the competition here in regards to what calculates or what commands a playoff team. For all intents and purposes, there I go, using that word again, my favorite word, the Washington Wizards have not played together. So this creates a different type of development here on how things are going to go down. Afshin.
Yeah, this is going to be interesting to see what they do. Nene Hilario and John Wall and Bradley Beal, this is still a factory that hasn't been completely built yet with all the machines in there that need to run like a well-oiled machine, So they've got a lot of work to do, but they did make the playoffs. They did do something right. However, the Eastern Conference is very, very weak.
That's right. It's been 6 years since the Washington Wizards have made the playoffs. Steve.
Yeah, it's been a long 6 years, and as you're saying, the Eastern Conference is weak, and that's kind of how we got to where we are now, basically. You look at the difference between the West and the East. I mean, barely over 500. You're in the playoffs in the East. In the West, you've got to win near 45 games almost to be able to make it.
And we're going to let you have the last word, Chris.
Well, I just think that, looking at the season in general and how the playoffs are going to stack up, the Wizards have shown in the regular season they can beat anybody in the East. They've also shown they can lose to anybody. So,
Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde mentality, right?
So I'm not sure what we're looking at. I think a lot depends on the matchup. If the season ended right now and they still got a couple of games to go, they would play Toronto. How they would stack up against Toronto, maybe they'd be okay. Would they do as well if they finished 7th and played Miami? Maybe not so good.
Well,
So we'll see.
Well, the good thing about this, at least one team from Monumental Sports has been successful, and that's the Washington Wizards. So we got to give them a standing or sitting ovation here. For Vincent Charles, Stephen Menges, Afshin Banab, and Chris Jerry, I'm Kevin Jeter. Coming up next, you can listen to the Nation's Capital Sports Show, of course, on TuneIn.com. But coming up next, more sports talk, and we're going to talk about the Washington Nationals right here on the Nation's Capital Sports Show, where it's most definitely on. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Nation's Capital Sports Show, where it's most definitely on. You can check out our website at tncss.net. I'm Kevin Jeter, along with Stephen Menges, Afshin Banab, Chris Jerry, and Vincent Charles. Stephen, before we go into the Nationals piece, you had a very interesting statistic for the Washington Nationals, actually for the Wizards.
For all the DC sports, and it's something I wanted to mention. I forgot. If you look at the beginning 2012 seasons, the four major teams, the Redskins, the Nationals, the Capitals, and the Wizards were the only team not to make the playoffs, and now, beginning 2013, the Wizards are the only team that will make the playoffs. So a very interesting shift in the landscape of DC sports here, and
Well, thank you
life
very
of a
much.
DC fan.
Well, our life as a DC fan continues with the Washington Nationals. Let's talk about them. I'm only going to do one thing, and I'm going to start this out. First impressions this year, Afshin.
Well, they've played the Atlanta Braves a bunch of times already. They're 7-23 against the Atlanta Braves, and they look awful right now against that kind of a team. How they do against the rest of the NL East and the rest of the National League, that's a whole other story, because there are teams that they can beat. They've got to play well against teams like Atlanta, St. Louis, San Francisco, and Los Angeles in order to compete for any kind of a title.
That's right. Speaking of St. Louis, we all know how that went 2.5 years ago. I mean, so we want to make sure that the Washington Nationals are who they say they are, and that's competitors, because all roads that lead through anything in the playoffs lead through either St. Louis or Atlanta. Chris?
Yeah, if they didn't play Atlanta so far this year, they'd be undefeated.
Yep.
6-0.
Yeah.
I mean, but 1-5 against the Braves. But it's a 162 game season. You can't read but so much into it. The thing about the Nationals, they've incurred some injuries right off the bat. Losing their catcher Ramos. Now, Ryan Zimmerman's going to be out for 4 to 6 weeks with potentially a broken thumb, I believe it is. So they've got some issues there, but I think by the time we get to the summer, things will settle down and they'll be right there where they're expected to be.
Vincent?
Like Avsheen, I'm kind of worried about their mindset against Atlanta. And we all know that the road to the championship goes through Atlanta. There have been positive points. Guys have been hitting. Some guys have started slow. There have been positive points in the pitching. We've had some good performances in the pitching and from the bullpen. So I see a lot of positive things. The most negative thing is, yes, they're playing against Atlanta.
Well, we hope that as the season progresses, as Chris alluded to, that perhaps they can pick up their confidence and their mojo along the way. Man, Ramos can't seem to catch a break. It's almost like a China doll. He cracks and he comes back, but hopefully he'll come back from this wrist injury, which is kind of common among baseball injuries. Stephen?
Yeah, I hope he comes back, and it is kind of a common injury, so hopefully once he is fully healthy, he'll kind of pick back up where he left off, which was good. I mean, he was starting to look good.
Right.
Looks like going to be a great fill-in spot at that catcher position there. And you asked how the Nationals are looking so far. Like we said, I was going to say they're looking hurt, basically. I mean, they have two Ramos, Zimmerman, even Span and Worth have hit the short-term DL as well, and Fister still yet to see him in a Nats uniform on a regular season so far.
Well, the good thing about this is at least it's starting off early, and we hope that when they do come back, it's early in the season. I would rather for this to happen now as opposed to happen at the end of the season when they're needed. Let's talk a little bit in terms of instant replay and how that has been kind of like a hot spot with me in Major League Baseball when it comes to the Nationals. I saw a game last night where they played against Atlanta in Turner Field where a ball was hit and it got stuck in the carpet, and that just kind of like the way in which they played it, or the umps called it, they did the right call, but man, something about this instant replay doesn't rub me, it's rubbing me the wrong way. Afshin?
Yeah, well, there have been a few cases, not just with the Nationals, but around Major League Baseball. And, this thing is supposed to take 1.5 to 2 minutes long before they make a decision. There was a case with New York and Boston that took almost 5 minutes, where was the runner tagged out, and clearly the runner overran second base, or he slid into second base, overran it, and I think it was Pedroia's glove was on his back. They went to the videotape, nothing, no call. He was safe at second. So, you're going to find these things happening right now, and I think we've got some glitches, and they've got to do some tweaks to it. But this replay system should work if you got the proper eyes looking at the replay.
Well, perhaps, as you said, as the season develops, they're going to actually, iron out those kinks. Chris?
Yeah, I agree with Afshin. I think they need to iron out the kinks, because right now there's some unintended consequences of what they've done. One of the things that the managers are doing now is before they challenge, they'll go out and kind of argue or discuss the play, wait for the assistant coach to go and look and see if the replay proves what should have happened or not, and then they're waiting for a thumbs up whether to say, I want to appeal or not. I think they need to probably tweak it and say, if the manager leaves the dugout to go to argue that play or say that he's thinking about it, then that means you have to challenge it. You can't sit there and say, wait and just discuss it for 35, 40 seconds until it gets better. Plus the other thing too that is kind of interesting is you put television companies in charge of this, because there was a play the other night where the replay was not shown to folks at home until after the next play began. So you've got a director in a truck who can decide, I'm not going to show that replay right now. Let them go on. Now I'll show the replay after the fact. It's too late once the next play's begun.
Vincent.
Those are good points, Chris. And I agree with you guys. There's going to be a learning curve here. We have to remember, this is the very first year for instant replay, okay? So there are going to be mistakes made, unfortunately. So what they're going to be doing this first year is ironing out those glitches or those wrinkles or whatever you want to call them, getting everybody on the same page, like you talked about, the TV people, the umps, the managers, making sure that they're not taking too long. All those things are going to be ironed out in this first year, and making sure that everybody understands the rules for each and every individual stadium.
Steven.
Yeah, I mean, I think hopefully it will get ironed out and things will start running smoothly. But either way, there's going to be controversial calls, replay or no replay, whether or not it sees it. I mean, the one that you're talking about on second, and clearly the mitt's on his back, it doesn't matter. I mean, you look to other sports. We had a touchception not too long ago. I mean, there's a lot with replay and different calls and who the officiating is. That's why we love sports.
That's right. I mean, what is sports without a little controversy?
Right.
Let's talk a little bit about skipper Matt Williams. He's been aggressive on calling the steals, and I want to get you guys' impression on that. First, we're going to start with you, Chris.
Well, you know, I wasn't really a big fan of him being hired, but, you know, now that I've watched him and the way his approach is to the game, I actually like the move. I think that he's going to be a good manager for them.
As opposed to Davy Johnson, who
Grandpa.
you referred to as grandfatherly like. He didn't want to take chances, but that was his modus operandi.
Yeah.
And so, but you know, that's nice to know that you like the changes, or you like what you see so far in Matt Williams. Afshin.
Yeah, I do. He's aggressive. The big point for me that I take out of all this so far during spring training and early part of the season is that the players are all in for him. And that, to me, is the most important thing, that the players, to a person, seem to like him a lot, and they believe in his system. So that's the most important thing right now.
And Vincent, we already know how you feel, but since we're doing our show here on TV, tell us how you feel about the base running and Matt Williams' aggressive type of play calling.
Okay, my jury will still be out on Matt Williams these first 2 years. But let's face it, he is definitely not Davy Johnson.
That's right.
I love the aggressiveness.
There you go. That's what I was getting at. Because I was getting ready to call him because I'm saying, you said one thing on the podcast, and now you're saying something else on the TV show, Steven.
It's the same.
I do like the aggressiveness as well. Of course, it's always a shame, and there's more second guessing that goes into it when you're aggressive and it doesn't go right. You can't second guess something when you don't make the move, basically.
That's right.
Either way, that's there. But normally, the aggressiveness will eventually pay off in the long run, but you may go through some streaks where it's not paying off for a moment, but you just got to stick to it.
All right, we're going to let you have the last word on that. And now we're going to move into our fast-paced but furious last call segment. Kind of reminds me of when you're in the bar, you're at your favorite watering hole, the barkeep says, last call, but this is actually 5 minutes or 6 minutes worth of us talking about sports, kicking the can. I'm going to throw stuff out to you guys and see how you handle it in your own universe, the universe of your mind. So we're going to start this first. We're going to start out Redskins sign Deshaun Jackson. Is this a good move, Steven?
I think it is a good move. I was really cautious at first, but then stories came out that a lot of the, character stories were false. So good to see that, and I wish him the best. But I think it is a good move. Line him up next to Pierre Garçon. Mainly, it's a good move because we didn't overpay for him. So
you don't think like 3 years at
I don't think that's
24
an
million,
yeah, exactly.
$8 million
I think that's a
16 million guaranteed.
I don't think it is. I mean, I think it's a good value for that player. Pierre Garçon's contract was bigger, so I think he still will remain the #1 receiver. He's certainly going to have more catches.
Okay.
And
Well,
then, yeah.
I'm going to add some water into this
Yeah.
because you're the opposite. I want to save you for last, but since I already know how you feel, you go, man. Go,
My
Vincent.
universe says this was not a Bruce Allen move. Look, the question is, here's a guy, he was a main cog of the Philly offense, right? Over 1,300 yards in receptions. Why do they get rid of this guy when he's a main cog in your offense? Right there, that's a red flag to me. They didn't need him. They need linemen.
All right, let's move on real quick. Afshin and then, of course, Chris.
Same reason the Caps might get rid of Alex Ovechkin. But seriously, Vincent, I agree. It was not a Bruce Allen move. It was a typical Dan Snyder move. But I do think this might actually work out for the Skins. And $16 million is like what, 3.5? Is like what, 5.5 a year guaranteed? 16 million guaranteed. It's not a lot for a big-time wide receiver. He's 28 years old. All those other guys that Snyder used to get, they were out of their prime. They were in their late 30s.
All right, let's move on, Chris.
And I agree with Steve. It wasn't that bad of a move from a cap standpoint. And the other thing that it does is, while it makes the Redskins better, it makes Philadelphia worse because they are missing their key player now. So I think, yes, that was a good move to pick him up.
All right, let's move on. DC United wins 2 games. Chris.
Hey, what can we say? I mean, I think a couple of weeks ago I was saying that, Ben Holson, my man, was even on the hot seat.
I remember that.
But they've won 2. They picked up 7 points early on after 6 games, so they're looking pretty good. They're like halfway to the number of wins they had last year. So, hey,
that's a vast improvement,
and they
right?
still got this,
early on in the season.
They still got 28 games to play. So, I think it's a good move so far. Now they have been home wins, but still, a win is a win.
That's right. Yeah. Steve.
Well, looking forward to trying to catch some games. I haven't watched a whole lot of the soccer recently with good reason with the amount of wins we talked about last year. but got to get out there in the good weather and check them out.
Vincent.
There's a little more swing in my step when I talk about DC United right now. 2 wins, that's an improvement. But remember, they're young, and I think still it's going to be a long season.
He's a radio man. There should have been a little kick in his step. Get it?
I get it. Hey, I want to see Eddie Johnson come to the fore and actually get some goals this season, and Boswell as well. Those 2 guys are key contributors, or they should be, for DC United. If they score, this team has a chance to go a long way.
All right, we have so many people that make us look good, and that's kind of hard to do for a sagey bunch here, with the exception of this young man here. But nonetheless, who are they?
Well, Director Charles Smith, and we have Craig Syfax, Ken Briley, LJ Lacoma, Kimberly Phillip, Andrew Schonenberger, Larry Hickman, and of course, the person who really puts all of this together, Devin Gallagher. And one more quick reminder, Kevin, you can catch the Nation's Capital Sports Show right here on AIM, Friday nights at 9:30, Sundays at 3 p.m.
And did you know that we also have our own YouTube page?
We do have our own YouTube page. I've looked at it many, many times.
That's right, and we're also on TuneIn.com.
That's where the views.
TuneIn.com, yes,
we
are.
just recently joined that. Go to TuneIn.com, look up the Nation's Capital Sports Show, and TuneIn's been very good to us because on the last 2 podcasts, 153 and 154, 154 we've had like 2,700 listeners, and that's pretty good.
Well, people better start tuning in.
That's right. I get that. Where's the gong when you need it? For my esteemed colleagues in Chris Jerry, Afshin Bernard, Steven Menges, and Vincent Charles, we thank you for listening and watching the Nation's Capital Sports Show, where it's most definitely on here at AIM, or AIM, I should say. And also, you can catch us on TNCS Sports at twitter.com. I'm Kevin Jeter. May you go out and have yourself a great sporting day as well as a great sporting week. And we'll catch you on the next episode of the Nation's Capital Sports Show, where it's most definitely on.